My mom always said a true gentleman is hard to come by, and if you ever meet one, you hold on to him. But in my drunken haze, I somehow ended up in the wrong carriage. Inside, I accidentally pushed the waiting Duke onto the seat. He tried to break free, but I pressed him down again. When I finally sobered up, my head was throbbing. I looked around and saw layers of dark blue curtains creating a semi-enclosed space. I was shocked. This wasn't my room. My bed had delicate pink curtains. Hearing me stir, the door gently opened, and several maids entered, carrying items for washing and dressing. "Miss, we're here to assist you. The Duke is waiting." I was confused. How was I involved with the Duke? Suddenly, memories from last night came flooding back, like a mist clearing. I come from a military family. My father is the revered General Lee, and I have 3 older brothers. As the only daughter, I've always been pampered. Yesterday, my cousin from my uncle's side hosted a small birthday party. She's always been jealous of my status in the family. Despite being the legitimate daughter, she's always overshadowed by her illegitimate younger sister. She used her birthday as an excuse to get me to drink several extra glasses of wine. I managed to stay somewhat sober in my uncle's garden, but by the time I reached the mansion gate, I was staggering. My maid, seeing my flushed cheeks, worried I'd catch a cold from the wind and rushed back inside to retrieve my forgotten cape. It was then that I mistakenly got into the Duke's carriage. If it had been any other woman, a brief wait for her family to pick her up would have resolved the awkwardness, but I was different. I had a secret that only my parents, brothers, and a few close servants knew. I was born with extraordinary strength. When I got into the carriage, I saw a figure in a blood-red, gold-embroidered robe. I squinted to make out his face, refined, with narrow, phoenix-like eyes that lifted slightly, giving him an alluring charm. I tumbled into his arms like a bell. Before he could help me up, I had already tackled him onto the fur rug lining the carriage. He seemed surprised and tried to push me away, but as soon as he propped himself up halfway, I pushed him back down. I found it amusing, so I gave him a little space. He tried to get up again, and I pushed him back down. This time, after falling, he didn't resist. He chuckled softly and asked, "Whose daughter are you?" I tilted my head, confused. "Why should I tell you?" "Then do you know who I am?" he pressed. "You're a handsome gentleman," I exclaimed. "My mom says handsome gentlemen are rare and should never be let go if you find one." "Can the young lady please get up first?" he asked. "No, you're good-looking. What if you run away if I let go?" He was speechless, seeing that he couldn't reason with my drunken self, and with no one else around, his coachman returned with a satchel. So, he took me back to the Duke's mansion. The carriage swayed, and I fell asleep before we even reached the mansion, my memories ending there. Looking at the maids surrounding me, I felt a bit overwhelmed. At home, I often heard my father mention that the Duke held immense power in the court, a formidable figure not to be offended. Now, it seemed I had offended him. Would I even survive? If he wanted my life, even with my superhuman strength, I probably couldn't escape the heavily guarded Duke's mansion. I could atone with my life, but I worried about implicating my parents. Oh, alcohol really does cause trouble. The maid led me through a winding corridor to a pavilion. The Duke was seated there, listening to a subordinate's report, occasionally asking questions. My arrival interrupted their conversation. The Duke waved his hand, and everyone but the 2 men behind him withdrew. I stood silently, watching an ant crawl past the tip of my embroidered shoe, determined not to speak first. "Did the young lady rest well yesterday?" he asked. I looked up at his face, then replied, "Thank you for your care, Your Grace. I rested quite well yesterday." His expression was calm, showing no hint of anger or displeasure. "Does the young lady remember yesterday's events?" My heart sank. Here it comes. He's going to settle scores now. I had already decided to feign amnesia, hoping to muddle through. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I drank a bit too much yesterday and woke up with a splitting headache. I remember nothing from yesterday." I bit my lip slightly, trying to look sincere and earnest, hoping to get away with it. He chuckled softly, his voice as pleasant as it had been in the carriage yesterday, but at that moment, I wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. "Then the young lady may return. Don't keep General Lee waiting." I was stunned. So, in just one night, he had already found out who I was. My father was right. The Duke was indeed extraordinary. As soon as he finished speaking, someone appeared and led me away. After a few steps, I looked back. He was still seated in the pavilion, reading a book. He truly had a refined and unforgettable demeanor. I unconsciously rubbed my fingers, as if I could still feel the sensation of my hand on his chest from yesterday. Well, this time, I certainly got the better deal. The maid led me out through the Duke's mansion's small side gate. A carriage was waiting outside. Before I could reach it, the curtain was pulled back, and my father's voice boomed, "Get in." Both my father and mother were in the carriage. My father's face was particularly grim, and my mother looked as if she had something she wanted to say but couldn't. Knowing I was in trouble, I just sat on the small stool by the carriage door, not daring to speak. I wondered if there would still be any lotus leaf chicken left for me at home that night. Upon returning home that day, I was punished by kneeling in the ancestral hall for 2 hours and forbidden from leaving the mansion for half a month. In the middle of the night, my maid, Fuyun, sneaked in with 2 cold buns. "Miss, this is all there is today. Please eat quickly. There's no lotus leaf chicken left." My craving for lotus leaf chicken persisted. She handed me the buns. "Miss, forget the lotus leaf chicken. The general ordered that not even buns be left for you." I hid these myself. There was no water in the ancestral hall, and the buns were cold and hard, making me choke. Although I hadn't returned home that night, there hadn't been a single whisper in the capital since then. It was clear the Duke had been thoughtful and considerate of my reputation. My father didn't say it aloud, but he was grateful. In less than half a month, he had secretly sent 3 thank you gifts to the Duke's mansion. The first was accepted, but the next 2 were returned. Still, my father felt he owed the Duke a debt of gratitude. I hadn't dared to tell him that I had offended the Duke in the carriage. If I had, he probably wouldn't be sending thank you gifts, but resigning from his post and fleeing as soon as possible. I popped another osmanthus cake into my mouth, clapped my hands, and wondered if I should sneak out of the mansion for some fun. My father's grounding order hadn't been lifted, so I'd have to sneak out. I changed into my usual boy's clothes and, with Fuyun, climbed over the courtyard wall. Beyond the small alley next to the general's mansion was the bustling main street. What should I do today? Rent a horse and ride in the countryside? Unfortunately, my beloved horse, Lightning, was still cooped up in the mansion. April, with its growing grass and singing orioles, was perfect for horseback riding. I gripped the reins. "Fuyun, you don't have to stay so close to me. I'm not going to run away." "Miss, you might not run, but you get lost easily," she replied. "Just let me follow you." Her horse stayed right beside mine. Ever since I got lost outside my uncle's mansion that time, Fuyun had been inseparable from me, afraid I'd disappear in a blink. Even when riding, she stuck to me like glue. It was truly exasperating. Fuyun was a maid my mother found for me when I was little. She was fiercely loyal. We grew up together, and she learned some basic martial arts and riding just so she could protect me if I was ever in danger. But I was born with superhuman strength, and my power only increased with age. Despite her diligent practice, Fuyun was always my subordinate. It seemed my natural talent was indeed beyond others' reach. After riding around for a while, I finally had my fill of fun. I took Fuyun and climbed back over the general's mansion wall. "See, my father's groundings have never stopped me, Leroy, since I was little." "Oh, right. My given name is Roar. I was born amidst the eager anticipation of the general's mansion's rough men, and my name was chosen while I was still in the womb. When I was born, my father was so happy he bragged to everyone about having a daughter. He even held a 3-day feast in the impoverished area outside the city, spending so much money that my mother complained about it for years. But then, when I was 3, I showed signs of innate divine strength, destined not to be as gentle as other noble ladies. This greatly disappointed my relatives. My mother often grumbled about it. My father said it was because I was a general's daughter that I didn't inherit any gentleness. After climbing over the wall and passing through the front courtyard, before I could sneak back to my own room, I ran straight into my father, who was leading some people to his study. Seeing me in my boy's clothes, my father's face turned beet red. He took a deep breath, barely managing to restrain himself from scolding me in front of outsiders. A familiar soft chuckle reached my ears. Only then did I notice that the person my father was leading was none other than Duke Qijing. "Miss Li, your attire is certainly unique," the Duke said, a half-smile on his face and a hint of teasing in his voice. My face flushed bright red. I had a feeling he meant something else entirely. "Like little one, how peculiar." Before I could reply, my father stepped in to smooth things over. "My daughter is mischievous and unruly. Please forgive her, Your Grace. Miss Li's nature is pure and her temperament charming, truly unforgettable." General Lee, you are too modest, he replied, seeing them still exchanging pleasantries. I quickly bowed and, seizing the opportunity, scurried away with Fuyun. Every time I saw the Duke, it was so awkward it made me want to go back to my hometown and become a farmer. Anyway, that night, my father didn't make me kneel in the ancestral hall again. Instead, he instructed the kitchen that for the next month, I was to practice self-cultivation and eat only vegetarian food. No, who ever heard of a general's daughter eating only vegetables? Without meat, how could I even lift the meteor hammer in the courtyard? But no matter how much I resisted, there was no meat. Even when I beat down my 3 older brothers at home, there was still no meat, and no one dared to secretly bring me any. It seemed my father was determined to punish me this time. I tried to get my mother to plead for me, but she said, "Go on, you'll be coming of age next year. It's time to listen to your father and temper your nature." I understood then, there would truly be no meat this month. My father really knew me well. Without meat, I didn't even want to leave the mansion, except for attending a tea party hosted by the daughter of the neighboring minister's mansion a few days ago. I had been cooped up in my courtyard. At the tea party, my close friends giggled with their eyes crinkled when they heard about my punishment. Humph, what a bunch of rotten friends. Fuyun also looked distressed, seeing me dispirited all day. "Miss, how about I sneak out and buy you something to eat?" My spirits lifted, but then I sank back onto the couch. "Forget it. If father finds out, you'll be punished too." Just as we were sighing together, Madame Wang, my mother's personal attendant, arrived with 2 people. I quickly had a maid usher them in. Behind Madame Wang was one of the maids who had helped me dress at the Duke's mansion last time. She bowed to me and presented 2 boxes, one small and one large, saying they were things I had left behind at the Duke's mansion. I weakly got up and asked her to convey my thanks to the Duke. I didn't even look at the items as I dismissed them. Once they were out of sight, Fuyun opened the boxes. "Miss, it's dried meat," Fuyun exclaimed loudly. I walked over and saw that the larger box contained 2 pieces of jewelry, both of which I had worn that drunken night. The smaller box was filled to the brim with dried meat. I quickly closed the lid, afraid others would see and report me to my father. I grabbed the box and hurried inside with Fuyun. For the next few days, I finally regained some energy, enduring the month of punishment thanks to that box of dried meat. The Duke truly was a good person. The summer heat made me reluctant to go out, so I waited until the crisp, clear autumn weather to take Fuyun horseback riding in the countryside again. This time, I didn't have to rent a horse. Lightning proudly accompanied me out of the mansion. Last time, we went to the western outskirts of the capital. This time, I wanted to explore the eastern outskirts. Conveniently, my mother had recently purchased a new estate in the eastern suburbs with hot springs. After riding, we could soak in the hot springs. If it got too late, we could even stay the night at our own estate. I rode Lightning at a furious pace, with Fuyun trailing far behind. After a few months, she finally stopped worrying so much about me getting lost. As soon as we reached the edge of the forest in the eastern suburbs, Lightning became restless for some reason. I had no choice but to dismount and tie him to a tree. I wanted to gather some bird eggs for the hot springs tonight. Fresh ones would be perfect. Not far into the forest, I heard unusual sounds. As a general's daughter for over 10 years, I was well acquainted with the clang of weapons. It sounded like people were fighting ahead. Using the cover of the foliage, I cautiously crept forward, pushing aside the obstructing weeds. I saw several black-clad figures attacking 3 people. Scattered around them were bodies, some in black, some in dark blue guard uniforms. There were still 5 or 6 black-clad men left, and the 3 people in the middle were all injured and gradually losing ground. 2 guards were fully protecting the person in white, but they were barely holding on and couldn't protect him entirely. When the 2 guards fell, 3 black-clad figures remained. The person in white defeated 2 more himself, but he was at his limit and began to sway. As they continued their struggle, I vaguely recognized the person in white as Duke Qijing. I didn't know whose plans I was about to disrupt, but the Duke had helped me, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. As the 2 sides were locked in a standoff, I suddenly rushed out and grabbed one of the black-clad figures by the shoulder. The Duke was startled, but recognizing me, he immediately shouted, "Leroy, are you crazy? Run!" Oh, the Duke actually remembered my name. I smiled sweetly at him, and at the same time, I used my strength to press the remaining black-clad man to the ground and pinned him with my foot. The black-clad man cried out in agony. It didn't sound like he just fell. I looked closely. Oh, it seemed I had accidentally crushed the bones in his arm. I looked up at the Duke, whose face was pale from blood loss. I nudged the black-clad man's arm, trying to fix it, which elicited another scream. This time, he completely passed out. If I said it had nothing to do with me, would you believe it? The Duke looked at me, as if he wanted to say something, but then changed the subject. How did the young lady end up here? I came for horseback riding and hot springs, I said. I heard a commotion and came to investigate. I only meant to watch the show, but who knew the Duke would be the main character? I had no choice but to join in. Can you still walk? I asked, frowning at the bloodstain on his leg. The young lady should go and enjoy herself. I have already notified the hidden guards for support. They should arrive soon, he replied. The Duke was still so considerate, but the more he acted like that, the less I could leave him to go have fun. Otherwise, I'd seem heartless. In the short time we'd been talking, the blood flowing from his leg had already soaked the weeds. His leg injury was severe. If not treated promptly, it could leave lasting damage. Your Grace, I apologize for my presumption, I said, then stepped forward. I put one hand under his armpit and the other under his knees, and lifted him into my arms. It was a Princess Carrie, like in the storybooks. I had specifically studied the pose. It was absolutely perfect, except the Duke was so tall. His legs dangled awkwardly as I carried him. I looked down at the Duke. His face was no longer pale. Instead, it was flushed. I worriedly asked, Your Grace, your face is red. Is it a fever from your injury? My mother's estate happens to have a doctor visiting these days. I'll take you to see him. As soon as we exited the forest, we ran into Fuyun, who had caught up. Seeing me holding the blood-soaked Duke, she fell to her knees in fright. I pouted, thinking, look at her, so useless. How could a general's attendant be so scared by a little blood that she can't even stand still? She still has a lot to learn compared to me. Oh well, no hot springs again. The next time I saw the Duke was at the New Year's palace banquet. No one knew I had saved the Duke. I hadn't even told my father or mother. My mother always said that those in power have dirty hearts. And who knew whose plans I had ruined and would face retaliation? The fewer people who knew, the less risk there was. Taking him to the estate was already risky enough. At the time, after his injuries were treated, he had passed out. The doctor repeatedly praised his astonishing willpower, saying that anyone else with such severe injuries and blood loss would have fainted long ago. However, for some reason, his qi and blood were disordered, and his emotions were unstable. The doctor wondered if he had been frightened during the assassination attempt. The doctor stressed the importance of rest and recuperation, and I nodded repeatedly. The Duke wasn't very brave either, so shouldn't he rest? My thoughts returned to the present. The palace banquet was reaching its exciting part. Younger generations from various families showcased their talents, displaying what they had learned over the year. It was also a subtle way of matchmaking. Whichever child performed well, their family would be inundated with marriage proposals in the spring. I watched the performances while enjoying the food. The palace chefs were indeed superior to those at the general's mansion. Yet, I felt a constant gaze on me. Was it because I was eating too much? Every time I brought a new dish to my place, my mother would glare at me. Everyone complained about how much I ate. It was truly agonizing for a general's daughter not to be able to eat her fill. That was the only downside to palace banquets. They were too restrictive. By the time it was my turn to perform, the banquet was nearing its end. Good thing I was quick-witted. If I hadn't eaten quickly just now, the food would have been cold after my performance. Another day impressed by my own cleverness, my mother had arranged for me to perform a sword dance. Since I wasn't particularly skilled in poetry or calligraphy, I had originally wanted to perform with a meteor hammer. It would have been unique and not repetitive, unlike sword dancing, which I was the third person to perform. Unfortunately, my mother absolutely refused. This was exactly my situation, talent with no outlet. After performing a set of sword forms, I was slightly out of breath. I executed a beautiful sword flourish and sheathed my blade. I stood there waiting for a long time before applause finally erupted. It was completely different from when others had performed earlier. These people really were distracted during the performances. They say my mother was the same way back then. She always had to wait a moment for applause after her performances. Fortunately, my mother was the most beautiful woman in the capital back then. And even if people were distracted, she still found someone like my father. I wondered if I could find someone similar. After the banquet, before getting into the carriage at the palace gate, I received a thank you gift from the Duke. It was a box of pastries, all varieties I had seen on the banquet tables and quite enjoyed. However, for a life-saving favor, instead of gold or silver, he gave me a box of pastries. The Duke seemed quite poor. By the end of March, I would be 16. After the palace banquet, various families frequently sent invitations to my mother. Ostensibly, they were for visits, tea ceremonies, flower appreciation, and poetry readings, but in reality, they were observing my character and status in anticipation of proposing marriage after the spring festival. My parents were overjoyed, saying they had to choose carefully from these suitors. I, however, found it a bit annoying. None of them seemed capable of even taking a punch from me. I doubted any could even hold a single one of my fingers. Fortunately, the Duke often sent me things, which kept me from being too bored. The gifts included food, toys, and various practical items. Just the jewelry alone filled half of my storeroom. I shouldn't have complained about the Duke being poor that day. He was indeed much wealthier than I was. My parents' happiness lasted only a few days before the invitations suddenly stopped coming. No one knew why, but I was truly relieved not to have to go out for these meetings anymore. Now it was my parents who sighed and fretted daily. The biggest event in the court during spring was the spring hunt. For this, my father was busy until late every night. He was responsible for the emperor's safety, the hunting ground's safety, and the safety of the officials and their families participating in the hunt. Not a single detail could be overlooked. I was also busy every day, preparing food for the journey to the hunting grounds and making new riding attire. I even wanted to pick out a new bow and arrow for myself. I visited several archery shops but couldn't find anything I liked. However, the day before we departed, the Duke sent another thank you gift, a brand new set of riding attire and a gem-encrusted bow. It was a bit strange. It seemed the Duke always managed to send me exactly what I needed at the right time. My father once said that nothing in the court, big or small, escaped the Duke's notice. I wondered if even officials' family members like myself were within the Duke's surveillance. At the hunting grounds, my spirits soared. Lightning had also been brought along this time. For this spring hunt, I wanted to hunt a fox fur scarf for my mother. I'll hunt a scarf for the Duke too. Rabbit fur will do. Consider it a return gift for him. I thought the hunting grounds would be teeming with prey, but to my surprise, after 2 days, I had only caught 4 small rabbits. Fortunately, while the fox fur scarf was out of the question, it should be enough to make 2 pairs of rabbit fur gloves, one for my mother and one for the Duke. As I delivered the rabbits to my mother's tent, my father was also there. I felt a bit awkward. I had forgotten to hunt a pair of gloves for him too. I left 2 rabbits for my mother. My father probably thought the remaining 2 were for him. Seeing me about to leave with the rabbits, he cleared his throat several times. "Father, is your throat bothering you?" I asked. "Don't forget to drink more hot water during the day." My father paused, then said, "Rower, don't you have anything for father?" I tilted my head, feigning ignorance. "No, father is brave and powerful. He lacks nothing." Amidst his unspoken words, I exited the tent. Don't think I didn't notice. You just want my rabbits, you silly dad. I carried the 2 rabbits and found the Duke's tent. Odd, there was no one in front of the tent. I had expected heavy guard and strict protection, but there wasn't even a single guard at the tent entrance. When I went inside, I would definitely have to remind the Duke. Why hadn't he learned his lesson from the assassination in the forest last time? So careless. I lifted the tent flap and walked in without a second thought. "Get out," a stern voice commanded. I recognized it as the Duke's voice. Even when I had offended him during our first meeting, he had never spoken to me in such a tone. This was the first time, and in front of everyone in the tent. It was then that I noticed the unusual silence in the tent. Everyone was gathered around one spot, with 2 guards shielding the Duke. They were protecting him. I took 2 more steps forward and saw what they were surrounding. A completely green, thick venomous snake, about as thick as my arm. Don't ask me how I knew it was venomous. It glowed with an eerie green light, clearly not a normal snake. Perhaps because my movements were the most noticeable and my entrance so sudden. Even the Duke's recent loud reprimand hadn't diverted the snake's attention. Its head slowly turned towards me, and it flicked its tongue. Ah, a snake. A snake. From childhood, I had been fearless of everything except snakes. At this moment, the Duke, who had just been unusually calm, now showed an anxious expression. I wanted to turn and run, but as soon as I lifted my leg, I realized my legs had already gone weak. It took all my strength just to stand still. Out of the corner of my eye, a guard to my left and slightly behind me was slowly approaching with a net, intending to catch the snake by surprise. I slowly let out a breath. As long as they weren't helpless, it was fine. Just as he reached the snake and was about to swing the net, for some reason, a loud roar was heard from outside the tent. A green blur flashed by. Relying on my instincts as a general's daughter, I subconsciously raised my hand and swatted at the darting snake. When I came to my senses, the snake I was holding had been squeezed into a pulpy mess in my hand. The two severed halves of the snake's body were flung into the corner of the tent near the entrance. Before I could fully relax, the Duke pushed everyone aside and rushed over, grabbing my hand. "Quick, get some clean water. Go get the Imperial physician at once." His face was terrifyingly pale, and his voice trembled slightly. A mere snake could scare him like this? I was about to comfort him when my vision went black, and I fainted. Before I lost consciousness, I thought, oh no, I, a dignified general's daughter, was actually scared unconscious by a snake. How would others mock me when they heard? When I woke up, it was already dark. The tent was lit by dim candlelight. Not far away stood a screen, through which I could see the silhouette of someone sitting, seemingly reading. I lightly coughed, and the person immediately stood up, walked around the screen, and stood by my bed. My guess was correct. It really was Duke Qijing. I smiled at him. "Your Grace." He pressed his lips together, didn't respond, and then turned and left. I was stunned. What was wrong now? Soon after, several maids entered in an orderly fashion. If not for the different time and place, this scene was remarkably similar to before. The next step would surely be for them to help me wash and change, right? The thought made me chuckle. When I raised my hand, I noticed it was wrapped in white gauze. Each movement caused a pulling pain on the back of my hand. After the Imperial physician changed my dressing, I was sent back to my family's tent. My mother cradled my hand, examining it carefully. What could she see through the cloth? But seeing my mother's reddened eyes, I didn't dare to say anything. Once I was propped back on the bed, amidst my mother's rambling, I learned that in the chaos, although I had crushed the snake, my hand had also scraped against the fangs of the lunging snake. In my nervousness, the snake venom had erupted, and I quickly fainted. However, as soon as I collapsed, the Duke immediately sucked out the poisonous blood for me. Coupled with the medicine prescribed by the Imperial physician, I was saved from danger. I asked my mother, did the Duke also get poisoned? He looked fine when I woke up. It was just a scrape on a snake's fang. There wasn't much poison in the wound. The Duke is perfectly fine, my mother said, tapping my forehead with her finger. I lifted my hand and looked at the back of it. It was still tightly bandaged. I couldn't see anything. My heart surprisingly relaxed again. This day had truly been chaotic. Yet, for some reason, despite being injured, I felt a hint of sweetness in my heart. Perhaps the medicine I was given when I fainted had sugar in it. This spring hunt had to be temporarily halted because someone had placed a venomous snake in the Duke's tent. I felt a little regretful. As a general's daughter, I hadn't yet displayed my valiant prowess on the hunting grounds. However, due to the poisoning, even though only a little residual venom remained, neither my father nor my mother allowed me to easily go horseback riding or hunting anymore. The Duke even sent people every day, first to deliver medicine, then medicated meals, and he insisted on watching me eat. He even sent a maid to stay by my side to attend to my daily needs. I originally wanted to decline, but since neither my father nor my mother said anything, I could only implicitly agree. I knew that by crushing the venomous snake this time, I had once again ruined someone else's plans. While the incident in the forest could be kept secret, this time many people knew, and I might face retaliation. Alas, the Duke's life was truly never peaceful. It was so difficult. I wondered when the culprit would be caught and everyone could stop living in fear. In the following days, everyone was disinterested. I heard that due to the Emperor's slight illness, the half-month spring hunt ended abruptly after only 10 days. My father said that the court had been unstable lately. First, the Empress Dowager's maternal family, the Liu clan, was found to have seized commoners' farmlands. The Emperor's maternal uncle's eldest son, the Emperor's cousin, had oppressed the people, engaged in bullying, and poisoned over 10 innocent young women. During the raid, secret letters exchanged with foreign dignitaries were even found in the Liu family's study. The court was shocked. The Empress Dowager requested to become a nun to atone for the Liu clan's sins. Out of deference to the Empress Dowager's plea, the male members of the Liu clan were exiled, and the female members were demoted to servitude. Before the Liu case was even concluded, the emperor's former tutor from his crown prince days, now the Grand Secretary Yu, was accused by his trusted subordinate of accepting bribes and selling official positions. Following clues from the Grand Secretary, over 20 other individuals connected to him were investigated, all of whom were new nobles promoted by the emperor in recent years. For a time, the court was in turmoil. The emperor, consumed by anger, fainted in court. Morning court was suspended for over half a month. During this half-month, another major event occurred. Just as the emperor was recovering from his illness, he summoned his favorite consort Yu to serve him at night. In the middle of the night, a venomous snake suddenly crawled out from under the bed. Fortunately, the emperor was unharmed, but consort Yu was bitten and died. Such an identical method to the one used at the hunting grounds led many to suspect it was the Duke's retaliation. People began to gain a clearer understanding of the relationship between the emperor and the Duke. After consort Yu's death, although the emperor resumed morning court, he remained deeply dejected and never recovered his spirits. Meanwhile, Duke Qijing had claimed illness and had not appeared since returning from the spring hunt. He seemed completely indifferent to court affairs. The Duke's mansion also remained quiet, without any activity. My father was cautious and reserved every day, meticulous to avoid any mistakes. Even my coming-of-age ceremony was kept simple, with only a few close friends invited. I was quite happy with this, but my mother secretly wiped away tears several times, feeling that I had been wronged. This feeling reached its peak when, after my coming-of-age ceremony, not a single family came to propose marriage for over a month. She always said that if I had had a grand coming-of-age ceremony, where I could have properly showcased myself in front of all the families, perhaps my engagement would have already been settled. In May, with the grass growing lush and trees flourishing, my father remained cautious, and my mother still sighed daily. And then, my first suitor arrived. Looking at the courtyard filled with betrothal gifts, with more still being carried in through the gate, I suddenly felt that the Duke was truly bad at managing finances. It's always been said that wealth should not be flaunted. By openly moving all these valuable items into my house, he scared my father and mother speechless. They were still staring at the newcomers, unable to utter a word. Although the proposal scene was awkward, my engagement was settled just like that. After all, there was no one else to choose from. No. After the engagement, I climbed over the wall and met the Duke once. He was still that handsome gentleman. Your Grace, are you truly going to marry me? Even though I'm not good at poetry or calligraphy? I wanted to know his feelings. I didn't want the kind of respectful but loveless life other noble ladies described. I wanted to be like my parents, treating my husband with sincerity and living a loving life together. The Duke reached out and removed a dry leaf from my hair, then gently rubbed it twice. You saved me, so I naturally owe you my hand in marriage, he said. Your Grace, you don't have to marry me out of obligation for saving your life, I insisted. So, there haven't been many marriage proposals to the general's mansion lately. I don't necessarily have to get married. Roar, do you really think no one came to propose to the general's mansion? He continued. I paused. Isn't that right? The Duke continued. The reason no one came to propose to the general's mansion is simply because they were told of my intentions halfway and retreated, knowing better than to challenge me. Good heavens. So, it wasn't that no one wanted to marry me, it was that the Duke had intercepted them. The Duke was actually this kind of person. I returned to the mansion in a daze, content to prepare for my wedding. The Duke, who used to secretly send me things, now sent them openly. I was practically surrounded by food, drinks, toys, and practical items. Just the jewelry alone filled half of my storeroom. I had heard that engaged ladies were often bored at home, spending their days studying household management and embroidering their wedding dresses. But I had no such worries at all. With so many things I liked, and someone continuously sending them to my mansion, every day was incredibly joyful. It wasn't until I sat in the bridal chamber in my wedding dress that I truly felt like I was married. Tonight, the Duke seemed to have drunk quite a bit of wine. His cheeks and neck were flushed a faint red. This was my first time seeing him in red, a color that complemented his skin tone perfectly. He truly looked gentle as jade, with an elegant and graceful demeanor. The small booklet my mother had given me trembled slightly in my hand, though I felt a little anxious. As a general's daughter, I told myself not to lose composure. When the Duke's hand gently rested on my shoulder, intending to guide me to the wedding bed, I quickly grabbed his wrist. With a slight exertion of force, I firmly pressed him down onto the bed. He struggled several times but seemed unable to break free from my grasp, so he reluctantly lay back down. I chuckled softly, teasing, "Your Grace, have you perhaps forgotten that I possess divine strength?" He raised his phoenix eyes slightly, gazing at me intensely. His voice held a hint of playfulness. "Then, my wife, how do you plan to wield this divine strength upon your husband tonight?" I was speechless for a moment. That the Duke would say such a thing was truly unexpected. As I stood there, stunned, he suddenly reached out and pulled me closer, gently lifting my neck. His lips then softly touched mine. Oh? His lips were so soft, I couldn't help but raise my hand and gently caress his face. The sensation was smooth and delicate, truly delightful. Just as he was about to deepen the kiss, I suddenly exerted force, pressing him down again. As a general's daughter, how could I easily surrender? I had to take control of this kiss. I firmly held his hands above his head, pressing his wrists tightly with one hand, then leaned down and bit his lips. At that moment, I thought, my appearance must be exactly as depicted in the illustrated book my mother gave me.